Hi there, this is Jeff from Oregon Plex, and I can tell you without a doubt from my own depth of personal experience that buying and owning duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes or four-plexes or whatever you want to call them in Portland, Oregon can be a great investment. But there are definitely some things that are unique about the city of Portland that you should understand before you decide to buy one of these types of properties. And these things are not necessarily totally obvious. They're not necessarily just common sense. So in this video, I'm excited to talk with you about 5 things to know before you decide to buy a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex in Portland, Oregon. The first thing I want to tell you is that landlord-tenant law is an issue that has multiple layers. And what I mean by multiple layers, I mean, even that expression, I guess, could mean a lot of things. But in this case, there's federal fair housing law, there's state landlord-tenant law, and in the city of Portland, there are even different and more specific rules that overlay on top of state laws and federal laws as well. And while we can't get into every little detail of that, in fact, it would be probably hard to even come up with every single little detail, which is part of the point in and of itself, because there are so many different specific rules. I'll give you a couple examples. One of the city's unique landlord-tenant laws has to do with the removal of a tenant after they have been there a certain amount of time. So let's say a tenant has been in a property on a fixed term lease for 12 months, and that lease comes to an end. And you might think to yourself, well, that's a contract for this person to have rented this property at a specific price for a very specific time, and that contract ends on, say, July 1st or June 30th, and therefore I don't have to renew that lease. Well, in Portland landlord tenant law says that if we are going to ask somebody to leave after even a fixed term tenancy, that we have to give them a certain amount of notice of 90 plus days, at least at the time of this recording, and we have to pay them what is called a relocation fee. And a relocation fee is a fee schedule that is outlined by the city and is based on the number of bedrooms in a property, and it ranges from roughly $3,000 to I think about $4,500 that we have to pay a tenant relocation assistance costs to move out of a property, even if they had just a 12-month lease. And so these are little nuances that have a huge impact on understanding what your investment strategy is when you're buying a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex. People from other parts of the country often ask me, Jeff, is Oregon a hard place to own rental property? Or maybe they've heard in the news or whatever that Portland specifically in Oregon is a bad place to be a landlord. And I always say, no, I don't think it's that. It's not a bad place. But the way that I think of it is if you printed out the rule book 20 years ago, it would have looked like a pamphlet. If you printed out the rule book today, it's going to look like a phone book. There's just a lot to know and an awful lot to keep up on. So the point I wanted to make here with number one is that you may know federal fair housing law, you may know the state's rules, but it's also important to study up on some of the unique things that the city of Portland has that kind of layer on top of the landlord tenant laws of the state and the federal government. Somewhat related to this is point number two I wanted to make, which is around utility reimbursement. So the city of Portland really wants to make sure that there's tremendous transparency with utility billing, and that they want to make sure that tenants are not getting, well, for lack of a better word, screwed by utility bills or utilities being charged back in a way that is obscure and basically just not fair. Generally speaking, the city of Portland's rules around landlord tenant law, the ones that layer on top of the state laws and the federal laws, are very much oriented towards protecting the tenants more than protecting the landlords. So if you're going to rent out a unit and you're going to include certain utilities in the rent, for instance, water and sewer is a very common example of this, then things are a lot easier because you are not telling the tenant that their rent charges or their utility charges will fluctuate based on usage. You just say there's one flat fee for your rent and includes X, Y, and Z. But many landlords don't necessarily want to take on the water sewer bill or be at risk if a tenant decides to leave a toilet running for a week while they go on vacation. So they want to bill the tenants back for the water and sewer. So if you're going to bill the tenants back for water and sewer, there is a process for that. There is specific documentation that is required for that. The city has forms, and these forms are available through all of the local landlord alliances and rental groups like Multifamily Northwest and Portland Rental Housing Alliance and groups like that can give you the form so that you make sure you comply. Compliance is not my favorite word in the world, but compliance is a very important word as it relates to everything we're talking about here with the uniquenesses of Portland. So if you want to be in compliance, then you need to fill out certain forms and present certain information about the underlying utility bills and how these calculations are made to the tenants in a certain amount of time in a certain format, etc. I personally know a landlord who has quite a few units who was targeted by some sort of an attorney who found some little technicality of something that wasn't being done quite right, and it resulted in a lawsuit and a very expensive settlement for that real estate investor. So these are things that need to be known and understood and just gone into with eyes wide open. Compliance is an important idea when it comes to working in Oregon and in the city of Portland as a landlord. Switching gears a little bit and maybe lightening the mood a little bit, in the city of Portland, now the city of Portland, let's just discuss this. The city of Portland is a big area, right? It might be a small city overall, but it's still a big area. And we talk about the city of Portland, we could mean the entire metro area, maybe even all three counties of Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington. But the city of Portland, very literally the city of Portland, um, is kind of its own unique little animal too. And the city is kind of broken up into the west side and the east side, divided by the Willamette River that goes right through the city. And we have other little quadrants. Well, the fifth quadrant, as we somewhat jokingly call it, is North Portland. And then we have South Portland now, too, in the South Waterfront area. And each neighborhood, each quadrant has its own kind of dynamics. But it's safe to say that in much of the city of Portland, there are many older properties. And tenants often really like older properties as much, if not more, than they like brand new construction apartment buildings. So obviously, I am overgeneralizing here, but it would be very easy to assume when you move into the city of Portland and buy an investment property, a duplex, a triplex, a four-plex, that you're going to be at a disadvantage when 3 blocks away there's a big brand new condo building that's gorgeous and has a gym in it and a spa and a coffee shop in the main floor, etc. And that just simply is not true. The preferences of tenants in many parts of Portland, especially the inner east side of Portland, where my own properties are, people like well cared for properties and maybe remodeled and updated properties, but they really also like vintage charm. They like older properties with character. And so having an older property that doesn't have a gym, for instance, is not necessarily a disadvantage in the city of Portland at all. In fact, it might be something that really attracts certain large tenant groups who really prefer that type of lifestyle. Other things that people really tend to like in the city of Portland is walkability, the ability to walk from one's place, from one's apartment or home to a coffee shop or a restaurant or a movie theater or a bar or anything along those lines, grocery store. Car-free living is something that people do like. So bikeability, kind of goes hand in hand with walkability, but when there's bike routes nearby that feel like safe routes for people to follow, that's also something tenants really like as well. So understanding that tenant preferences might be different in the city of Portland than everything you would expect is an important thing to understand as well, and probably not so obvious. Number four is understanding the zoning of your two, three, or four unit property and understanding what that zoning allows. So there are a lot of properties in Portland that are duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes that were built as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. But there are also lots of these small multifamily properties that were built as homes and then divided at one point in the past, usually in the distant past, into 2 units or 3 units or 4 units. And I own some of both. I own properties that were built as small plexes. I own properties that were built as homes and were, you know, 75, 80 years ago changed over to small multifamily properties. Now, what this means is that there are certain zoning areas, zones in the city of Portland that are specifically designed for small multifamily. But there's also zones like the R5 zone in Portland that is the standard residential single family dwelling zone in Portland where you will still find duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. And recently, there have been zoning changes where certain zones have been upzoned or downzoned, kind of depending on what the city wanted to accomplish, where the zoning has changed, and that has changed what is possible with a given property. So, for instance, if you owned a duplex on a large lot that's actually zoned for 8 units, let's just say, that creates what we call expandability, which is the ability then to add more units to the property. I guess you could evaluate tearing down what's already there, but certainly adding additional units, maybe another separate building, maybe adding on to the existing building, maybe taking the existing building and dividing it up further into other smaller units. But the zoning is a really important consideration in what you're buying because it might very well unlock more possibility. The city of Portland is as a general rule very interested in density. The city of Portland has a tight urban growth boundary, and so sprawl is not something you see in the city of Portland. And the city of Portland wants more and more housing units within its borders. And so there are rules that allow for the construction of accessory dwelling units, ADUs. An ADU could be attached, like, a finished basement ADU is I have one of those. It could be a detached ADU, like a living space over a garage. And ADUs can be possibly built or almost universally built on single family lots in R5 zoning with houses. They can be built in many cases on small multifamily properties as well. So understanding the zoning, understanding what's possible within that zoning, understanding things like ADUs that are more universal and a little bit zoning independent, not entirely, but very flexible. There's lots of different zones that would allow that, et cetera. There's a lot of possibility from a real estate entrepreneurial perspective to understand, to determine if a deal is a good deal and what the expansion possibilities are. And the last thing I wanted to mention that's a unique element of buying a duplex, triplex, or fourplex in the city of Portland is, and this goes back to the unique landlord-tenant laws. The application process has certain rules and requirements. So you can't just make up all of your own rules for what you will allow for screening criteria and when you'll advertise and when you'll take applications and how you'll take applications, who you'll decide to rent to. There's obviously lots of federal fair housing laws that have basic standards of non-discrimination and things along those lines. But for instance, in the city of Portland, if you have screening criteria about income, you can't require somebody to make more than 2 times the rent for your unit. You can't say, well, I only take people who have 4 times the rent. That's not allowed in Portland. You have to have a screening criteria of maximum of 2x the rent. When you advertise a unit and somebody wants to apply that day, you can't accept an application for 72 hours. You have to allow the marketplace, if you've advertised it publicly on Zillow, Rental Network, or Craigslist, or anything like that, you have to allow the market opportunity to see it and for all the people looking for an apartment to see it and then have time to inquire about tours or whatever they want to inquire about, and then an application is accepted 72 hours or more later. And there's just all of these little rules that it's important to know. And it's outside the scope of this video for me to explain every single one of them. And like I said, it would be hard to explain every single one of them because there are so many. So what we need is a resourcefulness to know where to look and to know that we need to look in the first place. So here's the takeaway I want you to have from this video. When you're going to buy a duplex, triplex, fourplex in the city of Portland, you need somebody who really knows that particular product type and that particular location, because duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes are different than houses. They're different than larger apartment properties. And the uniquenesses of the city of Portland make it different than other parts of Oregon, even other parts of the greater metro area. So, spoiler alert, that would be me, your Plex expert who understands the nuances of the city of Portland. And I'd be happy to chat with you about that at any time. You know how to reach me, 503 869 7303, or Jeff at oregonplex.com.